Gene Simmons finished his sentence. Ace Frehley said nothing. He just reached for his guitar, plugged into the amplifier, and played something that silenced everyone in the room. The year was 1975. The place was a rehearsal space in Midtown Manhattan. Kiss was between albums, between tours, between the version of themselves that played clubs and the version that would fill arenas. They were becoming something bigger, and everyone in the band could feel it. Gene Simmons sat on an equipment case, arms crossed, looking at Ace with that particular expression he wore when he'd made up his mind about something. Paul Stanley leaned against the wall, quiet, watching. Peter Criss was adjusting his kit in the corner, pretending not to listen but hearing everything. They'd been arguing about the next album. Not loudly. Kiss didn't argue that way. They argued through silence and careful words and decisions about who played what. The lead parts need to be stronger, Gene had said. Tighter. More structured. We can't just improvise our way through another record. Ace hadn't responded. He was sitting on a stool, his Gibson Les Paul across his lap, his fingers moving silently across the fretboard. Not playing. Just touching the strings. Feeling them. I'm thinking Paul and I should handle the leads this time, Gene continued. His tone was matter-of-fact, not cruel, which somehow made it worse. You're great at rhythm, Ace. Nobody plays rhythm like you. But lead guitar, that's a different thing. That requires precision. Structure. You're more instinctive. Chaotic. Paul shifted against the wall but didn't speak. Gene leaned forward. You're the spaceman, Ace. You're the mysterious one. The visual. The character. That's your strength. But lead guitar on the record? That needs to be Paul or me. The room waited. Ace looked down at his guitar. His curly hair fell forward, hiding his face. His fingers stopped moving on the fretboard. You'll never play lead on a Kiss record, Gene said, the words casual, almost gentle. Not the way we need it done. It's not personal. It's just what makes sense. Ace didn't defend himself. He never did. How did it come to this? To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Ace Frehley was before Kiss. Before the makeup. Before the spaceman persona. Before Gene Simmons decided what he could and couldn't do. Paul Daniel Frehley grew up in the Bronx. Working-class neighborhood. His father was an electrical engineer. His mother worked part-time as a bookkeeper. They weren't poor, but they weren't comfortable either. Everything required effort. Everything required proving. Ace discovered guitar at 13. Not because someone gave him lessons or because his family was musical. He discovered it because his older brother had an acoustic guitar in the closet and Ace was bored one afternoon. He taught himself. No formal training. No theory. He learned by listening to records and trying to figure out what his fingers needed to do to make those sounds. He learned wrong, probably, bad technique, unconventional fingerings, positions that would make a real guitar teacher wince. But he learned. By 16, he was playing in local bands. Small clubs in the Bronx and Manhattan. Cover songs mostly, Hendrix, Clapton, Beck. The audiences were drunk and loud and didn't particularly care if you played the solos exactly right as long as you played them with enough energy. Ace had energy. And something else. Something harder to define. When he played, he looked like he wasn't entirely present, like some part of him had gone somewhere else, and the music was just the evidence of that journey. People noticed. By the early 1970s, Ace was a working musician. Session work when he could get it. Bar gigs when he couldn't. He had a reputation in certain circles. The guy who could play anything after hearing it once. The guy who made strange choices that somehow worked. The guy who never said much but always delivered. In 1973, he saw an ad in Rolling Stone. Lead guitarist wanted for new band. Influences: Beatles, Stones, Who? No fakes, no drunks. He showed up to the audition with his Les Paul and an amplifier that barely worked. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley were there, along with a dozen other guitarists. Everyone played the same 3 songs. Everyone sounded competent, professional, safe. When it was Ace's turn, he plugged in, adjusted the volume, and played something completely different from what they'd asked for. Not defiance. Not showing off. He just played what felt right. Gene and Paul looked at each other. "Can you do the actual songs we asked for?" Paul said. Ace nodded and played them perfectly, note for note, but without any of the feeling he'd had in the improvisation. "Do that first thing again," Gene said. Ace did. "You're in," Gene told him. For the first 2 years of Kiss, Ace was exactly what they needed. The mysterious one. The one who didn't talk much in interviews. The one whose solos felt dangerous and unpredictable. The spaceman who looked like he might actually be from another planet. But as Kiss grew, as the stakes got higher, as the albums needed to be tighter and more commercial, Gene started to see Ace differently. Not as the wild card that made them interesting. As the liability that made them risky. Subscribe and leave a comment, because some moments only make sense when we remember them together. The rehearsal room was still silent. Ace hadn't moved from his stool. Gene was waiting for a response, an argument, a defense, some acknowledgement of what had just been said. Ace lifted his head slowly. His eyes met Gene's. He didn't look angry. He didn't look hurt. He looked like someone who had just been told something he'd heard before, and had already decided how to answer. "You want to hear tight?" Ace said quietly. Gene frowned. "What?" "You said you need tight. Structured. Precise." Ace stood up, his guitar still in his hands. "You want to hear what that sounds like?" "Ace, I'm not trying to." "I know what you're trying to do," Ace interrupted, his voice still calm. "You're trying to protect the band. I get it. You think I'm sloppy. You think I'm just the guy in the makeup who looks cool but can't really play. You've thought that since the beginning." Paul stepped forward. "Nobody thinks that, Ace." "It's fine," Ace said, looking at Paul, then back at Gene. "You don't have to explain. Just listen." He walked to the amplifier and adjusted the settings. Clean tone. No distortion. No effects. Just the guitar and the amp and whatever Ace could pull out of them. He sat back down on the stool. Positioned his fingers on the fretboard. Closed his eyes. Away from the spotlight, Ace made a choice no one expected. What Ace played next wasn't chaos. Wasn't improvisation. Wasn't the wild, unpredictable spaceman showing off. It was precision. He played a lead line. Slow, deliberate, every note held exactly long enough, every bend perfectly in tune, every transition clean and intentional. It was structured. It was tight. It was everything Gene had said Ace couldn't do. But it was also unmistakably Ace. That tone. That touch. The way he made the guitar sound like it was crying or laughing or telling a story that had no words. Gene's expression changed. The certainty flickered. Ace opened his eyes, still playing, and looked directly at Gene. Not challenging. Not defiant. Just present. Showing him something that couldn't be argued with. The solo built. Still controlled. Still precise. But now with feeling layered underneath the technique. Like watching someone prove they can follow every rule while simultaneously showing you why rules aren't enough. Paul wasn't leaning against the wall anymore. He'd moved closer, listening with the kind of attention musicians give when they're hearing something that changes their understanding. Peter had stopped adjusting his drums. He was just watching Ace's hands, the way they moved across the fretboard with absolute confidence. Ace played for maybe 2 minutes. When he finished, he let the final note ring out until it faded into silence. Then he looked at Gene and waited. Gene didn't speak immediately. He stood up from the equipment case, walked across the room to where Ace sat, and stopped directly in front of him. "Where did that come from?" Gene asked, his voice different now. Quieter. "It was always there," Ace said simply. "You just never asked to hear it." What followed silenced everyone in the room. Gene reached out and put his hand on Ace's shoulder. Not a gesture of dominance. A gesture of acknowledgement. "I was wrong," Gene said. The words seemed to cost him something. Gene Simmons didn't admit being wrong easily. "About what you can do. About what lead guitar means. I thought tight meant something else. I thought structure was the opposite of what you do. But you just showed me that's not true." Ace shrugged slightly. "I can play it your way. I can play it my way. I can play it any way. You just have to trust me." "I do," Gene said, and meant it. Paul walked over. "That needs to be on the album." "Exactly that. Whatever you just played. I don't know if I can play it again exactly the same," Ace admitted. "Then we'll record it right now," Gene said. "Before you forget. Before any of us forget." They did. That night, in that rehearsal space, with a single microphone and a tape recorder borrowed from the studio next door, they captured Ace playing that solo. Raw. Unrehearsed in the formal sense. Just Ace, his guitar, and the proof that he could do what Gene said he'd never do. That recording became the foundation for one of Kiss's most iconic guitar moments. The solo that people still talk about. The one that proved Ace Frehley wasn't just the spaceman in makeup. He was a guitarist who could do anything, tight or wild, structured or free, whatever the song needed. But more than that, it changed how Gene Simmons saw Ace. Not as the unpredictable element that needed to be controlled. As the musician who could be trusted to find his own way to the right answer. Gene never told Ace he couldn't play lead again. Not once in all the years that followed. Years later, in an interview, Gene was asked about that moment. About what changed his mind. He was quiet for a long time before answering. "Ace didn't argue with me," Gene finally said. "He didn't get defensive. He didn't try to explain why I was wrong. He just picked up his guitar and played something that made my argument irrelevant. That's not just talent. That's character. And it still haunts me, in the best way, because it taught me something about certainty. About assuming you know what someone can't do. Ace proved me wrong without saying a word. That's power I'll never forget." Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The Gibson Les Paul that Ace played that night, the one he used to silence Gene Simmons and prove what he could do, stayed with him for the next decade. He played it on every Kiss album during their most successful years. He played it on stages around the world. When Ace eventually left Kiss, that guitar went with him. It sits in his home studio now. He doesn't play it much anymore. But sometimes, when he's alone and the house is quiet, he'll pick it up and play that same solo. The one he played for Gene. The one that changed everything. Not because he needs to prove anything anymore. Because some moments deserve to be remembered. Some answers deserve to be played again. Some silences are more powerful than any words could ever be. And because Ace Frehley learned something that night too, the best response to doubt isn't explanation. It's demonstration. The guitar sits in a glass case now in Ace's home studio. Visitors sometimes ask about it. "Is that the one from the early albums?" they'll say. Ace nods. He doesn't tell the full story unless they ask the right question. And most people don't know what the right question is. But once, a young guitarist came to interview him. Nervous kid, maybe 23, with a beaten-up Les Paul copy and dreams bigger than his bank account. He looked at the guitar in the case and said something different. "What's the hardest thing you ever had to prove?" Ace looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked to the case, opened it, and lifted out the guitar. He sat down, didn't plug it in, just held it. "I had to prove I could play the way people needed me to play," Ace said quietly, his fingers moving across the unplugged strings. "Not the way I wanted to. The way they needed. And then I had to prove that those two things weren't actually different." The kid didn't understand. Not yet. "Someone told me I'd never play lead," Ace continued. "Said it wasn't my strength. Said I should stay in my lane. And for about 30 seconds, I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I was just the guy in makeup. Maybe the guitar was just a prop. What changed your mind? I picked it up, Ace said simply, holding up the Les Paul. I stopped thinking about what I couldn't do and just played. And the guitar told the truth when I couldn't find the words. He handed the guitar to the young musician. Here. Play me something you've been told you can't play. The kid's hands shook as he took the guitar. He positioned his fingers, hesitated, then played. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't tight. But it was real. Ace listened with his eyes closed. When the kid finished, Ace opened his eyes and smiled. Good. Now forget what they told you. Do it again. Your way this time. The second time was different. Looser. Truer. The kid's own voice coming through the strings. That's the one, Ace said. That's always the one. He took the guitar back and returned it to its case. But before he closed the glass door, he looked at it one more time. The instrument that had silenced the room. The proof that had required no words. The answer that still echoed decades later. Gene was right about one thing, Ace said, still looking at the guitar. Lead guitar does require precision, structure, discipline. But it also requires something he didn't mention that day. It requires truth. And truth doesn't argue. It just plays. The guitar went back in its case. The case closed. The story remained.